Welcome everyone to The Wandering Jew, mystical musings and inspirational insights from Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg. So we were in the middle of a section called A Good Eye. Let me just see. No, okay. And we will be continuing with that. For those who have the book, we're on page 94. This is the book, I think everyone knows by now, that we've been using, The Wandering Jew. And we are on page 94. We're going to be finishing up the section called A Good Eye, and then going to the next section, which is called Male and Female, He Created Them. So this one is called Seeing Inside. In Hebrew, the idiom to see someone's face, lirot panim, can mean either to appease them or fight them. Now, this is a very interesting thing because you see this in Hebrew many times, where the same word or root word can have two opposite meanings depending on the context and perspective. So here, Rav Ginsburg is pointing out this expression, to see someone's face, lirot panim. It means what we would call fighting face to face or hand to hand, or appeasing someone, appeasing them to their face. So Rav Ginsburg continues, after winning the wrestling bout with Esau's angel, Jacob says, "For I have seen the angel of God face to face, and my soul has been saved." So the question is, what does it mean in that verse that he saw he saw the angel of God face to face? Several of the traditional commentaries explain that seeing face to face in this context means engaging in physical combat. And we know that because when the angel names Jacob Yisrael, so he explains, Ki sarita im Elokim v'anashim v'tuchal. You contended, you fought with God and man, and you prevailed. That is the definition of the word Yisrael. So here we see that this idea that, however we understand it, Jacob was contending with God. He was fighting with God over his destiny, his fate, his past, his future. Later, when Jacob meets Esau, he says to him, and here we have the opposite meaning, "For I have seen your face as the face of the angel of God, and you have desired me," meaning that we appeased each other. So Rashi alludes to the idiom's meaning of making war while explicitly stating its meaning to appease. So here we have a somewhat common reality in Hebrew linguistics, and this really brings out the depths of the language, that a word can have two opposite meanings depending how it's applied. Ginsburg continues, our sense of sight allows us to assess a situation, to see what is before us. It grants us the ability to distinguish between friend and foe. By the power of love projected from our right eye, we appease those we have offended and reestablish our bond of harmony with them. By the power of might projected from our left eye, we express our determination to stand up to and live by the precepts of our faith and fight the enemies of truth and justice. So for those who were here last week, we had this idea that the right eye has a certain tafkid, a certain mission, a certain task, and the left eye has really the opposite. So this obviously it's not based on biology. It's really based on the sefirot, where the right side is the side of chesed, the left side is the side of gevura. And so metaphorically, each of our two eyes has a different function, but they balance each other. So that's what I said, but through the sense of sight, we assess, is it friend or foe? Is this a positive situation unfolding, or is it possibly a negative situation? And it's all coming through the eyes, which then give us the ability to judge what we are seeing. Rectified eyes see not only the superficial reality before them, but penetrate into the inner essence of the reality they observe. The word face in Hebrew means innerness. To see another person's face is to see the spiritual reality within them. So in other words, he began with this idea of lirot panim, to see someone's face. And we saw that this expression can be extended to fighting someone face to face, or face to face appeasing someone, being kind to someone, rectifying a situation. And it's always all happening through the sense of the eyes. But here, the idea of face, the word face in Hebrew, as Rabbi Ginsburg points out, means what we call Pnimiyut, inside, inner vision, the inside of reality, Pnimiyut. And it comes from face. Now, face itself is very paradoxical, because we all have a face, and this is what people see of us. But in a certain way, the face is external. In other words, someone can put on a good act. Let's say someone is very torn up inside, or going through some very hard times, but is at work or at a joyous occasion. And so they put on a face. And so people are seeing the external. They unless the person makes others aware through our facial expression, or it just comes out, people don't know what's happening inside of us. So the idea of the face in itself is paradoxical, because again, the face is the exterior, and it doesn't necessarily show the inner, but many times it does. Someone could just look at you and you could say, what's wrong? Is something wrong? Because your face is beaming that there's something wrong. Or the opposite. Oh, you look so happy today. What's going on? Because your face is showing your insides. So that's why this word can have two meanings. It can mean to go to war or to make peace. Okay. Now we go on to page 96. And this is called keen eyesight isn't necessarily good eyesight. One of the non-kosher birds in the Torah is called the ra'ah. Literally the seer. Ra'ah means ro'eh, to see. So this bird is called the one who sees. Why is this bird called the one who sees? The sages explain that this bird, the ra'ah, can stand in Babylon. This is the phrase that the sages use. This bird can stand in Babylonia and see a corpse in the land of Israel. Obviously, this is a type of carnivorous animal, a bird, and that's why it's an impure bird. But here the idea is, I mean, we know like an eagle, for example, an eagle could be flying way up high, but it can see a rodent from, I don't know how far exactly, but thousands and thousands of feet or yards, can see a rodent and then will swoop down. So apparently this bird, the Ra'ah, has the same capability. In Hebrew, Babylonia, because again, it's using the idea that this bird can be in Babylonia and see a corpse in Israel. So Rav Ginsburg points out that in Hebrew, the word Babylonia is cognate with confusion, bilbul. Remember the Tower of Babel? And that's where the name Babylonia comes from, because that's where the tower was built. But Babel literally means to confuse, to mix up. It was in Babylonia that God confused the tongues spoken by the builders of the Tower of Babel. The Baal Shem Tov explains that Babylonia represents the mind in a state of confusion. That's why even today, in modern Hebrew, being in a state of confusion is called bilbul. When someone is confused, or a situation is a bilbul, it's a mess. As an extension, Babylonia also symbolizes the entirety of the diaspora. In the diaspora, the Jewish soul, exiled from its homeland, resides in a state of confusion among 70 existentially confused, non-Jewish, as it were, non-kosher mindsets, the 70 nations that oppress the Jewish people. Indeed, the gematria of this word, bilbul, confusion, is exactly 70. So this is a very deep connection Rabbi Ginsburg is making, that the 70 nations of the world represent the confusion of the world, and especially when Israel is in an exile among the 70 nations, because we're meant to be in Eretz Israel. Not that there isn't confusion and bilbul here in Israel, but in a bigger spiritual picture, being outside of Israel, and especially when Israel is being oppressed by the 70 nations, this is he calls it an existential state of confusion, of bilbul. The Baal Shem Tov continues to explain that a confused soul standing in Babylonia may very well possess extremely keen eyesight. He may be able to see from a great distance, as it were, a corpse in the land of Israel, like this bird, the Ra'ah. So this Ra'ah has keen eyesight. But what Rav Ginsburg is going to point out, it doesn't mean that he has good eyesight. So a keen sense of sight isn't necessarily a rectified sense of sight. That's what we learned from this bird. It can see from Babylonia to a corpse in Israel, but it's a non-kosher bird. It doesn't mean this bird or this person has this keen eyesight, but it doesn't mean that it's for the good. It doesn't mean that it's in a state of rectification. Often the very opposite is the case. Balaam, we just learned about Balaam, the prophet of the nations, who was really a sorcerer. Balaam possessed the keenest eyesight, which indeed was the most potent evil eye, the antithesis of Abraham's good eye. So we're told that Avram had a good eye, and Balaam had really an evil eye. They both had very keen eyesight. But having keen eyesight, you can use it for the negative. The land of Israel is called the land of the living, referring to righteous souls who are referred to as the living. The impure Ra'ah, this bird, the seer, sees faults and flaws in the character and behavior of the righteous from afar, meaning it sees their corpses, so to speak. So in others, when it says that this bird can see from Babylonia to a corpse in Israel, why didn't it say that the bird can see always from Babylonia to a beautiful tree in Israel, or a beautiful person, or a beautiful other bird? The fact that it points out that it sees a corpse means that this bird represents this idea that Rav Ginsburg is trying to explain, that having keen eyesight doesn't mean that it's rectified eyesight. You can see all the bad in the world, in yourself, in others. A true tzaddik is like a mirror. Whoever looks at him sees a reflection of himself. So here he's adding a different point here. He's saying if someone is a tzaddik, those that look at him will see themselves reflected. And that's why tzaddik has tremendous power, because in a rectified sense, when people are around a righteous person, that righteousness rubs off and a person feels it about themselves. They feel positive. They're in the presence of a positive person, so they feel positive. So now he brings an example. The sages say that there were those who suspected Moses of committing adultery with their wives. I mean, this is an outrageous midrash that people would think such a thing. Well, why would people think such a thing? And so Rav Ginsburg explains, they themselves were adulterers in thought or in deed, and saw themselves reflected in Moshe, the Jewish people's all-inclusive soul. Moshe was what's called an all-inclusive soul. So when people would look at him, they would see themselves in a positive sense, because Moshe was such an awesome individual. A person would see their good points. But here we see that people who were adulterers, either in fantasy or actually in deed, so when they looked at Moshe, that's what they saw, because they were seeing a reflection of themselves. In his humility, the tzaddik, like Moshe, the humblest of all men, also takes a hard look at himself, searching for a subtle version of our faults in him. This is a very famous story told about one of the Chabad rabbis who would see people all evening, and the person who looked after him, his gabbai, noticed that when he would be done with these sessions, he would be pouring sweat. And even in the winter, and he would ask the Rebbe, why are you pouring sweat? So he said like this, he said, when someone comes in to see me, and again, he's talking allegorically, I have to take off my clothes and put on their clothes to really understand where they're coming from. And then I have to see whatever their fault is or what they need to fix. I have to see it in myself in order for me to help another person. So then I have to take off their clothes and put back on my clothes. So he said, after taking off my clothes and putting on my clothes all night long, I'm drenched with sweat. So that's a famous story about one of the Chabad Rebbe's. That's what Rav Ginsburg is trying to explain here. That the Rebbe doesn't like to judge people as if he can't even understand how a person could make that mistake or do that sin. No, he says just the opposite. There's a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. That Tzaddik is looking like, if this person is coming to me with this problem, it must mean that I have some of this problem, no matter how small, somewhere in my psyche. So I need to identify that in order to help this other person. It's a very, very deep psychological concept. The tzaddik recognizes that by first rectifying the source of the fault within himself, he will be better able to help us with our own rectification. His own self-criticism is inspired and directed by his infinite love for Israel. And so he sweetens the essence of the left critical eye, including the left in the right. So we had learned this idea that in the highest level of the soul, there is no left. It's all right. Meaning in the essence of God, there is no left. It's all right. But since we're created in the image of God, so we also have this ability to get beyond all the negativity and only be focused on the right side, the side of love and chesed and positivity. L'chaim, everyone, l'chaim. Okay, now for the last one in the section about a good eye. This is called the mind's eye, the heart's eye. Both the mind and the heart possesses an inner eye. Now, of course, we're not talking physically, but everyone has an inner sense within the mind, call it intuition, and in the heart, a deep sense of intuition in the heart. On Shabbat, the mind's inner eye opens to see godliness through contemplative meditation. In the temple, the heart's inner eye opens to see godliness through heartfelt prayer. So here, Rav Ginsburg, in just two short sentences, is saying something very, very deep about Shabbat. There's a way that we enter Shabbat or take on Shabbat or integrate Shabbat through the mind and through the heart. So he's saying, well, how do we integrate through the mind? That's through a meditative sense of being, meditative mind framework. And how do we integrate the heart of Shabbat? Is through the heart, through heartfelt prayers. The verse says, "They shall make me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell in their midst." The sages explain it does not say in its midst, implying that the divine presence shall dwell in the midst of the physical sanctuary alone, but rather in their midst, in the innermost point of every Jew's heart. This is something that is repeated many, many, many times. It's a very important verse in the Torah. V'asuli mikdash v'shechanti b'tocham. Make for me a holy place, and I will dwell in their midst. And so probably everyone has heard this many times, but it doesn't say in its midst, meaning in the tabernacle, which we do believe that there was a divine presence, but ultimately it's that God will dwell within us, that we will make a dwelling place for God within ourselves. In Psalms, the time of exile that follows the destruction of the physical temple is described as a time when we no longer see our signs of revealed divinity. Here in the Psalms, being in exile means we don't see the signs that God is sending us. The question is always asked, does God still speak to us? And I think one of the best answers is God does speak to us through the circumstances of our lives. That is how God is speaking to us, meaning through divine providence. The revealed divinity in our lives, when we understand that we are being led. We're making the choices, but we're also being led, and we see the signs. God is sending us signs all the time, but being in exile is like saying we no longer see our signs. In the Song of Songs, exile is described as a time when I am asleep, but yet my heart is awake. Again, these are just different metaphors for being in exile. One is we don't see the signs. In the Song of Songs, it's I am asleep, but my heart is awake. I am in exile, but there's still a point within me that is longing not to be in exile, or is still incorporating a sense of not being in exile. In exile, the heart's inner eye closes to the soul's conscious plane. Hence, I am asleep, but it remains open and awake to the soul's unconscious plane. Yet my heart is awake. While still in exile, it is the unconscious experience of the heart's inner eye that inspires and motivates us to devote our lives to Torah and good deeds. So here, in a certain way, he's almost answering, how did the Jewish people make for 2,000 years in exile? Because consciously, it was as if we were asleep. We were set away from our land. We were being oppressed. We were downtrodden. So what gave us the strength to continue? So here he's saying that even in exile, I am asleep, but my heart is awake. The Jewish people, even in the worst circumstances, in the inner point of the heart, was able to hold on to hope and to hold on to God and the Torah. In Kabbalah, Shabbat is connected with the sphere of Chochmah. That Shabbat is connected not only to Chochmah, but very much to Chochmah, which is wisdom. And Chochmah is the experience of the mind. The temple is connected with the sphere of Binah, understanding. And Binah is the experience of the heart. So that's what we said before, that Shabbat is both an experience of mind and heart, of kind of a contemplative, meditative state of mind, and heartfelt prayer. Chochmah, the sphere of Chochmah, is above time. The mind's essence and the experience of its inner eye are changeless. And so Shabbat remains with us for eternity. Excuse me. So again, here he's saying a very, very deep thing, because on Shabbat, not that we can't experience this during the week, but on Shabbat, there are moments that we touch eternity. I hope everyone has had this experience. It could be any time in Shabbat, but what he's explaining is when we go into a meditative state of mind, the way we walk is not the way we walk during the week. The way we eat is not the way we eat during the week. The way we pray, the way we sing, it's all in Shabbos mode. And Shabbos is eternal. It's called Ot Leolam, an everlasting sign between God and the Jewish people. And so there's an aspect of eternity in Shabbat, comes every week, but there's also the ability to experience the moments of eternity. So I'll tell you a quick story that when I was teaching and leading groups at Hebrew University, so I was teaching them about Shabbat, and I explained to them that exactly what we're learning now. There's an aspect of eternity in Shabbat. And I said to them, every Shabbat, I consciously or unconsciously try to experience a moment of eternity. No claim that we're in the state for hours, but just to have a moment of this above time and space is worth everything in the world. And so I explained this whole concept to them. Then, I don't remember, maybe a couple months later, I had a whole group of students from Hebrew U at my house for Shabbat. In those days, almost every Shabbat, we had a group. And we're sitting at the table and we're eating and discussing. And one of the women who was sitting near me turns to me and says, "Did you have your eternal moment yet?" And at first, I didn't know what she was saying. She just said it out of the blue. And then I realized that she must have been at this class that I taught. And it turns out that I had that moment in the morning. And I explained to her when it was and how it was. So this is something that I encourage everyone to consciously, sometimes it comes unconsciously, but to consciously, it can be in prayer, it could be when singing, it can be when just walking, it could be, for me, it's most of the time sitting in my yard, usually in the morning when it's quiet and the birds are singing and the sun is shining and there's a gentle breeze, and it's like you're in the Garden of Eden. You have this just moment of perfection. I bless everyone to have those feelings every Shabbat. So Rav Ginsburg continues, and this will be the end of the good eye section. Binah is associated with space and is the origin of severe judgments. So this goes into the Sfirot. Binah is the highest sphere on the left side. And the left side is of course, Binah has so many positive, wonderful attributes. But it also is considered the origin of judgments. Judgments in themselves are not necessarily negative, but they can be. But he continues, thus at present, the visible temple site is desolate because Binah is connected with the temple and the temple does not exist. It's desolate. But the experience of the heart and its inner eye fluctuates. Sometimes it is revealed and sometimes concealed. That's what we said before. Even in exile, excuse me. Even in exile, my heart is awake. So sometimes we can allow our self feeling of being in exile overwhelm us, and sometimes the national experience, like the last 2.5 years of war, of feeling somewhat in exile, and other times it's just the opposite. Our heart is awake. So Rav Ginsburg says, when Moshiach comes, the temple will be rebuilt, and we will witness godliness with our heart's inner eye at a higher, more essential level than can be witnessed with the mind's inner eye. So here, what Rav Ginsburg is saying, going back to what he said, that the mind has an inner eye and the heart has an inner eye. And we know from the Alter Rebbe and really all of Chassidut that the mind has to rule over the heart because we're human beings. Our emotions are very volatile and very fluid. And sometimes it's like riding a roller coaster. So the mind has to rule over the heart. But all of Chassidut also says that there are moments when the mind must listen to the heart, because there's an inner eye of the heart that in many cases supersedes the mind's. So here he's just finishing and saying that when Moshiach comes, we will witness godliness with our inner mind and our inner heart. But here he's saying that at the time of Moshiach, the inner heart will rise above the inner mind. And that is something that we might even get to tonight, and if not next week, because the next section is male and female, he created them. And so actually, I'm going to find exactly where he says this. And that's how we'll start. Just give me a second. Here it is. Okay, so this goes perfectly. This is not the first one. This is on page 101 for those who have the book. I'll go back over some of them, but this is called Woman's Ascent. So this is very, very connected, because we're saying that the mind is connected to Chochmah, which is wisdom, which is usually associated with masculinity, of course, not exclusively. And the heart is more the feminine, again, not exclusively. So Rav Ginsburg says like this: the Kabbalist Rabbi Isaac Luria, called the Arizal, taught that throughout all of human history, from creation to the coming of Moshiach, the feminine goes through 7 stages of elevation until attaining equality with the masculine. So let me explain. He's going to say a lot in a few words of very important concepts. So first of all, he says that all of history is a witness, of women going from, as it were, an inferior status to a status of equality. And we're going to see in a minute that even greater than masculinity. So what is he referring to? Why would we talk about women being in an inferior position? And he mentions in history and creation. So this is the well-known story on the 4th day of creation, where at first it says that God created the 2 greater lights. And then it says the greater light and the lesser light. That's where the Midrash comes and explains that we're talking about the sun and the moon. And the moon came, the two greater lights, the sun and the moon, as it were equal. And the moon said, two kings cannot wear the same crown. How can you have two greater lights? One of them has to be the king. And so God answers very enigmatically, so make yourself smaller. And the moon was made smaller. This, again, is very symbolic, is full of very, very deep ideas. But here we see the moon always represents the woman, the sun is the man. And here in creation, before there were human beings, there is this hint that the sun and the moon, their status vis-a-vis each other are not equal. There's the greater light and the smaller light. And then, of course, we have what happened in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. When Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, she gave it to her husband. But one of her curses is that she would become more like beholden to her husband. And so this represents what we call the fall of Eve. So the Arizal explains, though, and we see throughout history, and again, it's not that the Torah in any way, shape, or form is advocating this, but it's just pointing out that this is how reality played itself out. So we see in societies all over the world until this day, but it is changing and changing quickly, that females were, as it were, in a compromised position vis-a-vis men, or in an inferior status. And so, but the Ari says this is not supposed to be like this. And actually, all of history is a series of rectifications to end this unrectified state. So he says that there's 7 different stages. So now Rav Ginsburg continues. History is the story of the ascent of women from what the Arizal describes as a point beneath her husband's sphere of Yesod, foundation, the power of procreation, to where together they share the crown, the superconscious sphere, ostensibly becoming 2 kings with a single crown. So again, he's alluding to this idea that the moon says or complains to God or points out to God, how can you have 2 kings with 1 crown? So God says, make yourself smaller. So you make the claim, so only one of you can wear it. But the Arizal is pointing out that ultimately, in a certain way, God could have answered, what's wrong with having 2 crowns for 2 kings? We're just having 1 king. But what Rav Ginsburg is saying is that the rise of the status of women is going to lead to 2 kings with a single crown, meaning the unification of male and female energies, just like they were before. The feminine side was taken out of Adam. Adam and Eve were created together. They were one being. And then God separated the female energy, and then there were 2 beings. But we still maintain, every male maintains a female aspect, and every female maintains a male aspect. Here we're not talking about gender, we're talking about energies, psyche, emotions, intellect. In the period following the Messianic age, the feminine will ascend to an even higher level than the masculine. This is a concept given over throughout Kabbalah and Chassidut. The woman will become the male's crown, shining light to him from above. A state described in the verse, a woman of valor is her husband's crown. Eshet chayil ateret bala. So here, this is sometimes it's referred to as tikkun chava, the rectification of chava. And so, again, this was a short piece, but it's very, very symbolic and potent. And here we see in our age, there's no doubt that the status of women has changed dramatically, radically in the last 100 years. I mean, just 100 years ago, women were protesting just to have the right to vote. And for many, many years, there were no female senators or congressmen or governors. I'm just talking about the United States, but it's true of every country. Now you have all of that, many, many women, and you have prime ministers and you have presidents of countries that are women, foreign secretary of states, you name it. So we see that the status of women, here we're just talking about politics, but in the work scene and in industry and everywhere. There was a time there were no female directors of films, just didn't exist. Now there's plenty of women. There were times where there weren't women doctors. And so we see that what the Arizal said 500 years ago is actually playing itself out right before our eyes. This is a huge rectification in history and in humanity. Okay, l'chaim. Okay, so since we started a new section called Male and Female, He Created Them. So I'll just do another one. And that's the first one on page 99. So as always, what Rav Ginsburg is like condensing in these very, very short pieces of wisdom is really quite incredible. So the first one is, he says like this: God created us with two genders for a good reason. Opposites complement one another and bear fruit. That's all he says. God created us with two genders for a good reason. Opposites complement one another and bear fruit. So this is obviously true biologically, but he's saying at a deeper level, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, that this is, we could say, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. This idea that even though we should have equal rights, but men and women are not the same. And in certain being culturally correct, there is sometimes an attempt to wipe out any differences between men and women as if they don't exist, but they do exist. Males are not like females, and it's not good or bad, positive or negative. It's just reality. In great measure, men and women think a bit differently. Again, doesn't make either one better than the other. Not at all. But men and women operate emotionally many times very differently. Needs are different, etc. So now he talks about God's gender. Look what he says here. It's just like, it's really, really profound. He says, God has neither body nor gender. When we refer to him as he, it is because we want to be his she. Now, this is a big thing now with pronouns. Don't even want to get into that. But there are many, many people who question, why do we call God he? God is not male or female. So why should we call God he? And so the answer is as he's going to actually say, in relationship to God, all of creation is the female, including every male and female. Every male in relationship to God is like a female. All of creation. That's one of the secrets why the Torah begins with a big bet. The letter bet means house. And we know that a woman is called the bayit, is called a husband's home. And in fact, the first word, Bereshit, is Ashrei Bat, is happy is the daughter, or Rosh Bayit, that God is the head of the house. All of creation is considered feminine. So that's why we call God he. And today's culturally, correct people that will say, no, we should call God she, is according to what the Torah is teaching us, is missing the point. When we say God is he, it's not because it's like a male in a masculine in the way that we think about it in gender. It has nothing to do with gender whatsoever. Okay, so now listen what he says. When God decided to conceive the world, he became in his infinite light both male and female. So listen what he's saying. The three stages here. First, in the essence of God, there is no male and female, masculine, feminine, he or she. None of that. But what Rav Ginsburg is saying, it's really what I said before. When God conceives of creating a world, then he became not. We said that we refer to him as he because we're the she. But here, the world wasn't created yet. He's just conceiving creating the world. So he already anticipates that there will be a need, although he's down to biology, a need for male and female. And so what Ginsburg says, I'll read it again. When God decided to conceive the world, he became in his infinite light both male and female. Now listen what he says, and this is it. The whole thing is 3 sentences. When God contracted his infinite light, meaning in order to make a place for the world, he's now starting the process of creation. His feminine side became us, and his masculine side became him. When I first read this, it was like to get my head around what he's trying to explain here. So I'm going to read it again. When God contracted his infinite light, his feminine side became us, and his masculine side became him. So I'm going to read the next one so we'll understand this, what he's trying to say. And this is called Transcendence and Immanence. What he's going to say now is the absolute foundation of all Kabbalah. He says divinity has both a feminine manifestation and a masculine manifestation, meaning divinity in its revelation within our experience. Because again, in God's essence, there is no even male and female. But it's only when God conceives a world, God sees the wisdom of, like he said in the beginning, that God created two genders for a good reason. Opposites complement one another and bear fruit. God wants to bear fruit by creating a world. So it says like this: the feminine manifestation of divinity is called the Shechinah, the divine presence. It is the indwelling, immanent light of the Creator, referred to in Kabbalah as the infinite light that fills all worlds. So here, somewhat paradoxically, even though we call God He, the indwelling of God in this world is feminine. In other words, our experience of God is much more feminine. The Shechinah is the indwelling presence of God. The masculine manifestation of divinity is called Hakadosh Baruch, the Holy One, blessed be He. This is the Creator's transcendent light, which surrounds every point of reality and is referred to as the infinite light that surrounds all worlds. So these two concepts, God filling all worlds and surrounding all worlds, the filling of the worlds is, as it were, God's feminine energy or light. God surrounding all worlds is his more masculine. And so, let's say on a day-to-day experience, we're experiencing the feminine aspect of godliness more than the masculine. And he ends this by saying, our purpose is to unite these two aspects of divine light, the transcendent and the immanent, like a groom and bride are united by doing good on earth. And so this is like the Song of Songs, the allegory of the love between God and Israel. God being the groom, Israel being the bride. And the idea is to unify God's indwelling presence with God's surrounding, drawing God's surrounding presence into this world. And not that they should be separate. So this goes back to helping us explain when Rav Ginsburg says, when God contracted his infinite light, meaning to create the world, his feminine side became us. But it really means also his feminine side became that part of God that we experience. But it became us because the expression, all is God and God is all. So we are part of God. We're an expression of God. All of creation is an expression of God. But that is the feminine side, as it were. So we become the feminine side of God, and that's why that's the side of God that we experience. But we also need to draw down the surrounding light in order to unify. We know everything about Judaism is unification. God is one, Hashem Echad. So we have to unify what we conceive of God's masculine and feminine sides. We do that by unifying our own masculine and feminine sides. So there's no doubt we're talking about very, very deep ideas here. And I bless us all to be able to meditate on this and to understand it in a very, very deep way.